Hi, everyone. Welcome. Good day. I'm delighted to facilitate this session on grounding the global goal on adaptation and the forthcoming global indicators in local action and thinking about transparency, accountability means across scales. So we have an exciting panel today with unique perspectives and voices. We have 5 speakers. First, Nega Emiru, part of the UNFCCC GGA expert group and representing the LDCs, and also part of the International Platform for Adaptation Metrics. We have Na Tran Tan, who is the head of the Adaptation Division of the Vietnam Ministry of Agriculture and Environment. We have Sasha Jackson Singh, who is Deputy Director of Climate Analytics in the Caribbean. We have Animesh Kumar, who is Head of Office for UNDRR Office in Bonn and part also of the UNFCCC GGA expert group. And finally, we have Małgorzata Ćwiek, who is statistician at the United Nations Economic Commission for Europe. But before going to them, I'd like to just share a bit of a recap and a few thoughts of what these indicators mean. Next slide, please. So why are we discussing this at COP30? And to remind us, the Global Goal on Adaptation was established in 2015 in the Paris Agreement. And this set a very qualitative, high-level goal and aspirations to enhance adaptive capacity, strengthen resilience, and reduce vulnerability to climate change. But that needed a bit more precision, but it's complex because adaptation varies across the world. So countries passed a huge milestone in 2023 at COP28 when establishing the UAE framework for global climate resilience, as we see on the left of the slide. And this is the framework to help shape, conceptualize, and organize how to direct action, but also how to track and to report on progress on the global goal on adaptation. This was 8 years after the GGA was first established under the Paris Agreement. But we now have 11 targets, 7 targets on global key themes that are important, but also 4 targets on capturing the progress of how to do adaptation across the iterative adaptation cycle. So this sends a strong message that resilient processes are needed to have resilient outcomes, and these can't be unlinked. The next step was to define indicators for the operationalization of the UAE framework for global climate resilience. And that is what the UAE BELEM work program has been doing for the past 2 years, with the absolutely remarkable efforts of 78 experts and exchanges with parties and observers to narrow down and identify a set of 100 global indicators that are relevant and specific to adaptation across each of these 11 targets. And that is what we're coming to the table to discuss at COP30. Now, these indicators, they will help track global progress, for example, by informing the global stocktake and providing some data points. But what does that mean at other levels? And where is the data going to come from? So with the hope that a set of balanced indicators will be agreed at COP30, what are we going to do with these afterwards? What does that mean? Next. So it's useful to remember when thinking about this that countries, organizations, regions, and other actors already have monitoring, evaluation, and learning systems that use indicators that collect data and that assess the progress of adaptation at different levels. And as one of the 11 targets of the UAE framework on global climate resilience highlights, the indicators also aim to support the operationalization of those national MEL systems in order to better report and ultimately to better inform decisions on adaptation. But as recent research for the NAP Global Network shows on the right, these 2 graphs, while all the NAP documents that have been submitted to NAP Central currently mention M&E or MEL frameworks, less than a third of them mention a source of finance to support MEL system implementation. So we have a big gap, and our synthesis really show how MEL components are integrated in NAP documents, but it shows this gap between planning and implementation that we really start to be a bit too familiar with. Despite this, we still have good news, and we see that countries are still really making efforts on MEL system and on reporting, with the Adaptation Gap report being launched yesterday that showed that almost every country that submitted a biennial transparency report as of the end of August had included an adaptation chapter. And that's really good news. Even if content and quality needs to be improved, it really shows that there's a willingness for countries and other actors to look at how to better track and to share, to understand what works, how, but also for whom. Because better capturing progress means that we can improve, we can learn, and we can adapt faster in a more inclusive and a more effective way. And that is really critical. With this, we need different scales of evidence and different mail systems to connect appropriately to reflect local realities and lived experiences. And that's what we're going to look at today. We're going to turn to our panel now, who will share their perspective on key points to operationalize the global indicators, but mostly how this links to faster and better adaptation. We'll turn in order to Nega, then to Na, Sasha, Animesh, and Margozeta. So, starting with Nega Emiru. Nega, I hope you still have power and are still with us. So our question for you is, given your experience in developing the final 100 indicators and your work with the international adaptation metrics, what do you think is necessary to move to implementation for the GGA, especially for these developed countries?
Okay, thank you everyone for allowing me to take the floor and also being part of this discussion on the GGA process. So before I go into the different sets of recommendations I have for the different parties, I want to reflect on two key topics. One is that the indicator development is still a work in progress. So many of you know that the the last mandated workshop stated a lot of things about the different or the divergent views different parties have towards some of the indicators, particularly the MY ones. So I feel that this indicator refinement and development is a work in progress, and there is also inconsistent views towards MY indicators, not among the negotiators, but also among the technical experts. This is what we have witnessed during the last expert group meeting we had in Nairobi. So anyway, in whatever the case, this issue will be discussed in Belém during the COP30 deliberations. So my recommendations for the parties will be to have a compromise agreement despite all the inconsistent views towards the MOI indicators. So before we talk about the implementation of those indicators, we need to have a compromise agreement. So in whatever I mean way it is. So next to the compromise agreement, so my recommendation for the technical expert groups will be to work on the standardization of the indicators. As you have seen in the set of indicators, the different indicators are at a different level of at a different state of development. So these different indicators have different level of information, details. Some have indicator definitions, some not. Some have a methodology for data collection, some do not have, and also metadata development for some of them we have. So there is a very inconsistent state of the indicator. So before we take them into the operationalization state, we need to standardize all those indicators, feeding all the necessary information so that every party, observer, or whoever is using them will be able to interpret and use them in a very consistent way. So once the standardization of the indicators is done, the next step will be for the parties, observers, and technical experts groups to engage in piloting. So before we directly before we start using those different indicators, we need to pilot them. So we need to check out the feasibility of these different indicators in terms of operability and so on. And with this piloting stage, we'll have the chance to have a local perspective of these different indicators. And also we'll have the chance to see options for data sources and so on. And more importantly, this piloting stage will help us to domesticate these different indicators so that they reflect the local needs and priorities, and at the same time, the local contexts, including the prevailing climate risk. So once we went through the piloting stage, the next step will be to pursue alignment and vertical integration with the clear results framework and theory of change. So these are the GG indicators are normally standalone, very generic indicators. So when we try to use them at a national, subnational, or whatever governance level, we need to align with existing projects and programs, and also currently existing national policy instruments like the NAPs and NDCs, and also the long-term low emission and climate resilient strategies. So by doing the alignment and vertical integration, that allows us the aggregation and comparability of the data we get at different levels. So as most of us understand, the GGA indicators need to be able to allow aggregation and comparability at national, regional, and global levels. So once we did the alignment and vertical integration, then the next step will be to promote standardized frameworks while allowing flexibility. So we know that there's so many standardized standard frameworks being used to measure adaptation process and progresses. Then we need to have those standard frameworks. At the same time, we need to have them flexible to reflect the local needs and the priorities. Once we got the standardized frameworks, then the next will be complementing qualitative narratives with those GGA qualitative and quantitative indicators. As you know, the GGA indicators are normally qualitative and quantitative indicators. So beyond having those qualitative and quantitative indicators, we need to have the qualitative narratives to complement the data that we get on those different indicators, because these qualitative and quantitative indicators normally tend to ignore the local views and perspectives of the vulnerable community. So by using qualitative narratives, in addition to the qualitative and quantitative indicators we have, that will help us to have a more complete picture of the progress we are making in terms of adapting to the changing climatic conditions. Then the next will be to promote for coordination among indicator custodian agencies. So we know that in many countries, the data systems and processes are so fragmented. So many ministries normally don't know each other what they are doing, but they're collecting maybe in the same data on the same indicator, but in a very different way. So coordination among indicator custodian agencies needs to be promoted. That will help us harmonizing the data collection methodologies, and at the same time sharing data infrastructure available for across the different ministries. Then you can also have a data governance system which will be shared by the different custodian agencies. Then the next will be to have.
Yep. I would sorry about that. I would kindly ask you if you can wrap up within the next minute, please, just to make sure that we
yes,
have time.
I will just 1 minute. Yeah, so the next step will be enhancing the national and subnational data systems and the processes. You know that in many developing countries, we have a very weak data systems and processes which are very fragmented. So we need to invest on that, and we need to build the institutional capacity, whether it is on data infrastructure, data governance policies, and so on. And Also, the last point I want to make is that we need to have a continuous review of performance indicators. So this is very critical because there is a dynamic in the adaptation process, because you know, the priority for climate risks actually varies with time. So we need to capture that dynamic. So this is what I can say for the moment, and back to you, Emily.
Thank you so much, Nega, for the very comprehensive view on what next steps should be. This has been very rich, and I especially take your comments on the qualitative narrative and the need to integrate local perspective, and that piloting will be essential for this. I'm now going to turn to our second speaker, Ms. Nat Thanh Tan, who's the head of Adaptation Division in Vietnam and the Ministry of Agriculture and Environment. Hi, Nat. Thanks for joining us in your late evening. So for you, given that Vietnam already has a national MEL system for adaptation, what does the adoption of global adaptation indicators mean for your system, including what are some of the challenges it might create, and how do you plan to integrate these new indicators in your system? Thank you.
Thank you for questions. Yeah, Vietnam has started our NAP process in 2018, and to assess the NAP process, we have ratified the M&E system in 2022. So hence, we have nearly 4 years of experience in implementing the M&E system. And our M&E system consists of 72 indicators, which allow us to monitor and evaluate the adaptation activity through the 6 evaluation contents, such as state management of climate change, or reducing natural disaster risk. And our M&E system help us to assess the process of implementation of the NAP, the NDC, and provide the input for GST and other climate change reports, such as adaptation communication, BOO, or BTR. And currently, we are reviewing the proposed GGA indicators, and we have come to a conclusion that around 50% of the GGA indicator are feasible, and we are thinking about that once the GGA indicators will be approved at the COP30, we will have planned to revise our M&E system and the M&E indicator to reflect all the GGA requirements. And we will try to strive to evaluate our existing indicator based on the development of the M&E system over the past period, and we will integrate the GGA indicator to complete and to make our M&E system more practical, more feasible. And we're also planning to include the adaptation indicator to our national statistic. And for the past 4 years, the M&E development has given us a very valuable experience. So Vietnam is planning to, we already have the manual for the M&E, which is supported by the NAP Global Network and very supportive during the training and capacity building at the national and subnational level. And we're planning to update this manual and reflect all the GGA indicator. And this manual will support us in the process of implementation of the M&E system. Yeah, I want to share our approach, and we'll be open to listen for your comments. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Na. And we have a bit of time, so I'll ask you a quick question. What are some of the key challenges that you see? I know you work quite closely with the indicators, so I'm allowing to ask this. What is the main challenge that you see in, we use the word domesticating or contextualizing or nationalizing, localizing. What does that mean for you? And if you have an example that comes to mind, then please, can you share?
Yeah, we have reviewed all the indicators because we are preparing for the negotiation process in the COP30. We have some comments regarding the indicators. Some indicator is quite concrete, and some indicator is very hard to understand if we are planning to implement at the subnational level. And it's required a very high capacity building because the staff in the subnational level, they do not understand the meaning of the indicator. And some indicator required the interview or the process of collecting information will be very comprehensive. So we suggest that the GGA indicator should be more feasible, and should be available for the information so that we can achieve our target.
Thank you so much. Now, this is a great insight on what it means at the national level to integrate the global indicators. Thank you for your comments. I will now turn to Sasha Jatan Singh, who's Deputy Director of Climate Analytics in the Caribbean. Hello, Sasha.
Hi, Emily. Hi, everybody.
Thank you for joining us today. And we're now going to move to a regional perspective, which is quite interesting, changing scales. So given your experience developing the regional global goal on adaptation for the Caribbean, what does adopting a global set of indicators mean for different levels of government, especially for SIDS?
Sure. So the proposed regional goal on adaptation for the Caribbean, the RG, was actually developed and launched in 2023 at COP28. So while, the UAE framework was being developed and the targets and so on, and it really was developed through a civil society-led and consultative approach with a range of Caribbean adaptation actors, civil society, practitioners, communities, policymakers, researchers, and so on. And over the last 2 years, the RGA has, it's being further refined to align with the UAE framework, as well as the progress happening on the work on indicators. So really and truly, the RGA is still evolving, and, the COP30 decision on the final indicator list will be quite important in shaping its future in terms of its adoption and implementation in the Caribbean. And the proposed RG, because it's a proposal, it really was developed out of a need to better connect what was happening at the global level with the GG to, local on-the-ground realities, voices and adaptation actors in the Caribbean. And what I think is quite important to note is that it's really grounded by the principles of locally led adaptation, because that was identified as what our adaptation approach in the Caribbean should be focused on. And the RGA targets, they're aligned to the GG thematic and dimensional targets, which you spoke about earlier, but they also incorporate regional priorities and specificities. So for example, in the proposed RG, we have a target related to energy, security, access, and resilience, since that is identified as a priority for resilience building in the Caribbean. And, we have right now Hurricane Melissa just ravaging the Northern Caribbean, and you see the importance of energy access and security for resilience. We also have a RGA target on health and climate, because that is a priority as well. But the focus in the Caribbean is looking at a systems transformation approach to build a climate resilient health system that will work and meet the needs for the region. And, specifically, the RG would really allow Caribbean communities to have this mechanism to participate and feed into decision-making, implementation, and monitoring progress on adaptation actions from the local level all the way up to the regional level, feed into the GG reporting and so on, and really bring that context, specificity, and local scale and flavor of adaptation. And I think, and I really appreciate the first speaker when he said the importance of qualitative narratives. And that came out in the proposed RG, where the emphasis is really on the importance of having adaptation narratives, which could weave data from indicators, stories, perspectives, and knowledge and best practices from, national and local government agencies in the Caribbean, local communities, researchers, civil society, and so on. And this is really due to the fact that in small islands, we have existing data, capacity constraints, and so on, that could really hinder reporting burden. So having that narrative could really help to highlight critical, adaptation priorities, really truly illustrate the depth and richness of adaptation success, and give a holistic story of adaptation progress in Caribbean countries without burdening countries in data collection and so on indicators. So I think that's quite important in terms of implementing, because the RJ really focuses on how we could implement the GGA indicators once it's agreed at COP30. The next step, of course, is implementation. What I think is quite interesting for the RJ, particularly for governments and also civil society, is really the importance of the RJ allowing us to now look at mapping what are the adaptation finance flows and MOI means of implementation for the RJ targets in the Caribbean, to create a better picture of where adaptation finance and MOI is flowing to, where are the bottlenecks, how much more MOI and finance are needed. Also looking at what adaptation actions are actually working and should be scaled up, and what aren't working as initially expected and should be reconsidered. So it's really giving that, taking something that's very theoretical in terms of the indicators and this COP30 decision, and looking at how is this going to look at implementation and what that means for building resilience in the long term in the region. And the expectation is that having an RG and the implementation of it could effectively create an adaptation investment roadmap for the Caribbean, which could help, Caribbean governments, local communities, CSOs to better unlock and access adaptation finance from a variety of sources. And at the same time, the RG could help Caribbean governments to be ahead of the curve by being a real, practical regional vehicle for implementing and reporting on the GG framework which should be starting next year. And sorry, I also just wanted to mention that we're actually updating the proposed RG, and we're expecting to relaunch this at COP30 at a side event at the CARICOM Pavilion on Tuesday, November 18th. So FYI, we're really excited about it, and it's really looking at implementation. What are the coordination and financing options, as well as a preliminary implementation roadmap.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Sasha. And I'll ask you if you can share the details in the chat. I'm sure our participants would be delighted to hear of it. And thank you. And I really enjoyed what you explained about the RGA and about how implementing and operationalizing global indicators and global visions need to come through the articulation at the regional and more local level through, the regional vision for resilience and for adaptation, and that's how it gets threaded through by the articulation of different visions. Thank you so much. I will now turn to our fourth speaker, Animesh Kumar. Hello, Animesh.
Hi, hello, Emily. Hello, colleagues.
How are you today?
All good.
Wonderful. So Animesh is the head of office of UNDR office in Bonn, and also was an expert on the UNFW Policy GGA group. And so we're going to skip to another level even after regional, and taking from the experiences of UNDR. So what lessons do you think can be learned from existing indicator frameworks to inform the operationalization of the indicators under the UAE framework, please?
Thanks, Emily, and hello, colleagues again, and greetings from Bonn. We are at a stage here, and Nega already has mentioned in terms of the key processes that we have followed as the expert group While the workshop earlier this month, in the first week of October, was an eye-opener for many of us in terms of how the indicators were discussed, it does give us an insight into what would happen at the COP. Irrespective of the number of indicators that are adopted, whichever number of indicators are adopted will need to be operationalized. And we have existing experience over the last several decades in terms of different intergovernmental frameworks. In our context, it's the Sendai framework, which we are 10 years down the line as of now, with 5 years to go in implementation and monitoring, with 171 countries currently reporting, or for that matter, expanding it to the SDGs, where we are also maturing in terms of the big data and the reporting processes. So looking ahead beyond the COP, hoping we will have a positive, constructive, tangible outcome in terms of the indicator adoption, I would look into 2 levels of readiness, readiness for operationalization. One level of readiness is of the indicators themselves, and the second level of readiness is of the countries to be able to report. So the first one, in terms of data readiness of the indicators, we will need to have, and we have proposed as experts for each of the indicator, a metadata, which includes existing status of methodology, data availability, data standards, and many others. But it's very preliminary. Once the indicators are adopted, the metadata needs to be compiled, or in some cases modified or developed. That would be very important first step to ensure that we move forward towards reporting processes. This will mean the required level of standard methodologies, which is where the statistical community also comes into place, having the right data standards so as to maintain the consistency in data across different countries. And this includes taxonomy, ensuring desirable levels of disaggregation, hoping that many of the indicators also have benchmark baselines so that comparison over time is possible. So it's about the change in certain variables that denotes adaptation and not the absolute value of the adaptation of the variable itself. I think those elements would be very important. And finally, we shouldn't forget that it's eventually a global goal. And to be able to have a global goal, we need to have global values. And to be able to have global values, we need aggregation. So the indicators, if they're not consistent, don't follow coherent methodologies, and don't follow kind of coherent data standards, aggregating them at the global level would not be possible. I think those are some of the key things which will help us understand how ready we are in terms of rolling out the indicators. This will also tell us what is the minimum data that is required to make some meaningful analysis, and what is the optimal data that we would need to inform policy. And somewhere between the two is what every indicator would lie. The second level of readiness is about the countries. And here we are completely focusing on the national capacities to report. And good to hear from Vietnam in terms of the critique that many of the indicators may not be possible to report, especially with the low capacities at the subnational level. Here we have a good practice that we exercised around 10 years ago under the Sendai framework. We conducted a data readiness review across countries, and a total of 87 countries responded to that data readiness review, and the result of all of these is in the public domain. We provided a kind of a checklist for countries to complete, a very simple one, structured around the status of data availability, data quality, data accessibility, and data application for each of the indicators that were adopted. And the countries responded to that, and that gave us a very interesting overview in terms of which indicators countries are ready to report and which countries have challenges to report. And that helped us develop the capacity building packages for the countries to be able to report them better. The sum total of all of this, 10 years down the line, the indicators for which the countries said in 2017 that they are not ready, today those are the least reported indicators. So the range is between 150 to 160 for one set of indicator vis-a-vis 50 to 60 for another set of indicators. And that shows the range of country readiness to report on data, which was the case 10 years ago and remains the case even now. So it does show that it takes a lot of time for countries to be ready to start reporting. And finally, what is important in terms of in-country readiness is about the coordination aspect. And I think Nega pointed to that as well, that each of the thematic target is one ministry. Each of the adaptation cycle target is also one ministry. And if that be the case, the data would be lying across multiple ministries owned by different departments across the government. And it will require a kind of a coordination of data collection exercise in the country for a country to be able to report. So that in-country coordination is very important. And we should not forget that while adaptation relevance is important, adaptation does not get implemented in isolation. So it's a Ministry of Agriculture, which will report data on 9B, or Ministry of Water reporting 9A, or Ministry of Health reporting 9C. How are we coordinating all of this to be able to coherently report? I think that would be something which also would require some work as well. I'll stop there.
Thank you so much, Animesh, for sharing some of the rich experience that you have on previous international frameworks. And it's great to see that it's not just within the UNFCCC that we have these same data readiness and country readiness challenges, and we should learn from previous lessons. I will now turn to our last but not least. Thank you so much, Animesh. Malgorzata. Thank you for joining us today. And Malgorzata is statistician at the UN Economic Commission for Europe. So again, a different perspective. And so for you, once the indicators are formally agreed at COP30, what do you see as being the logical next step for UNES, and national statistic offices to move towards operationalizing and integration?
Thank you so much, Emily. Thank you for having me and for the opportunity to reflect on this important question. And I particularly appreciate the timeliness of it, because although we don't have the final indicator set yet, I think it is very important to think about these next steps already now, and how to ensure that decisions in Belém can really ensure and enable a practical, robust GGA indicator set that will yield reliable, comparable, and relevant data for years to come. So I think this is really the perspective that we should have on that, a really long-term lasting solution. So at UNECE, we work with national statistical offices from across Europe, North America, and Central Asia on improving climate change related statistics. But also we support them in producing and reporting statistics for the SDG processes and contribute to the Sendai framework reporting. So although there are definitely some aspects that will be very specific to the GGA indicators, there is a lot we can draw on from those other processes when thinking about possible next steps. So I will quickly discuss those. And what that next steps could be at national and international levels. So let's begin with the national perspective. And then, let's say we have the adopted set of indicators, and then now what? So my predecessors have already mentioned that several times, the importance of really identifying the multiple stakeholders in this process, understanding their roles, and setting up a proper coordination mechanisms. This is really the foundation. And for that, especially from the perspective of producing the indicator, it is really useful to consider its whole life cycle, from the data collection through processing, reporting, until the final use. So that perspective will help us to really see all of the stakeholders and to all of these steps. And that could be from data holders, data compilers, to data users like ministries, analysts, researchers, local governments. And we can see that this landscape gets very complex very quickly. So that coordination is, again, really crucial, because the same stakeholders can play multiple roles even for different indicators. And among those stakeholders, you would definitely want to include your national statistical offices, because they are the main part of national statistical systems. They produce official statistics on key issues related to the economy, society, environment. They are already in possession of a lot of valuable data, and they really have the tools and the expertise to undertake more data collection and processing. They have the legal mandate to do so if there is a need to access new data sources, for example, conduct new surveys. maybe amend existing data collection instruments, but also they already play a coordinating role in national statistical systems and in the context of SDG reporting. And they also have a role in contributing to the Sendai framework. So there is already a lot going on there that can be built upon in the GGA operationalization process. So as you have set up this foundation of identifying the stakeholders, creating coordination mechanisms, you can proceed at the national level to the other steps. And as already has been also mentioned, some kind of data readiness exercise or piloting will be very useful to review available statistics and data, to start compiling, calculating data for available indicators, but also evaluate the feasibility of producing modified indicators and formulating plans to address data gaps. So I already mentioned national statistical systems usually work, they have annual statistical programs, and then in many countries we also have long-term national strategies for development of statistics. So these are already existing documents, and if you can mainstream the data needs related to GGA into those documents, that can ensure that in long term those data gaps will systematically be addressed in a coordinated manner as well. And then, of course, the next steps will be reporting according to the modalities agreed upon. But finally, I also wanted to encourage everyone to not stop their thinking at the reporting, but actually think so that the number don't really end up just in some kind of gray database, or in maybe the worst case in some kind of PDF report. But it really is a number that can live and that can be used by various actors at various levels. So it's really crucial to think also of dissemination and communication of those indicators, so making sure that they are easy to access and use for analysts, researchers, communities. And that can also help to build trust in that process, to create transparency and build public awareness. And now we can also think about next steps that can happen internationally. So of course, we expect that there will be some further process under UNFCCC. We know that the indicators vary in readiness, so we can imagine some kind of a tiered approach in which further work will continue on developing the metadata. But so here you also want to ensure that you include statistical expertise, but also that you build on those national realities of producing this data that we will learn about from those data readiness exercises. So then these two processes should really go hand in hand and feed into each other. And you can also think of some mechanism for capturing this kind of feedback. And just as we adopted this broad perspective on the national level of involving all the stakeholders, also at the international level, I would really encourage everyone to think beyond the UNFCCC universe. You could say it's a universe in itself, but beyond that, there are a lot of existing mechanisms and platforms that can be leveraged to really accelerate progress on GGA indicators and also avoid duplication of efforts. So this could be used for methodological work, for capacity development, experience sharing, co-development of solutions. The list is really endless. And of course, I'm coming from the statistical community, so this is the universe that is the closest to me. And at UNECE, we will certainly continue to work with national statistical offices in our region to support them in being as helpful as possible in this process. But there are also many more organizations, many more processes than that. At minimum, the SDG custodian agencies, when there is a lot of expertise, there is a lot of workflows already in place. But also,
I'm just going to ask you to wrap up quickly. We
have last sentence.
Wonderful.
And then also the United Nations Statistical Commission is the global body for adoption of statistical standards and methods. So these are just some of the ideas that could be considered as we go further. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for this great, and I think we forget often, like people who work in with the adaptation ministries or the adaptation teams in countries forget about some of the roles of the statistical offices. So thank you so much for this. With no further ado, we have some questions from the audience. So I will take two out first, and then I'll go to the panel to I'll ask all the panel if you want to come back into video, please, to be here for the Q&A. So we have one question from Enka, who asked the panel, do you believe that the proposed GG indicators will effectively capture progress on locally led adaptation and that they are aligned with the principles for LLA? So that's one question. And we have another one from Paul, asking, given how important the GG indicators are going to be for measuring progress, but also as an advocacy tool to push for more action in underinvested areas, we will need ways to simplify the output so they resonate with decision makers and communities. But with the whole process being driven by really smart, really technical people, I'm worried the results will be inaccessible. Any thoughts on how to deal with these risks? So one on integration of GNGA indicators and LLA, and one on how to better communicate and integrate the indicators with local decision makers and communities. Would I have any volunteer to go first, please? Animesh, do you want to go first?
Yeah, let me give it a shot. And of course, colleagues, please pitch in. And I guess there are two sets of questions. I also see one more coming from Richard, also focusing on locally led adaptation. And so is also the case with Anke. I guess the issue is here that we're looking at the global level in terms of the indicators, the nature of what they're intended to do, and they need to capture the local realities. And it's like two parts of the whole thread of data work. So what we have done is from our side, ensure that the highest possible measurable level of disaggregation is provided within the indicators so that the local realities are not forgotten, while also ensuring that while aggregating the information, the local realities do not get masked. I think that's something which would be important. Also, the other part is that we will also need to ensure that we are not measuring progress in implementation or activities through the GGA indicators. What the GGA indicators would intend to do is at the measurement at the outcome and output level, because the measurement of activity progress is so subjective to countries, to the local realities. And while we are all reaching at the same adaptation goal, the adaptation pathways will always differ, country by country, community by community. Hence, I would not even recommend to expect very strongly from the GGA indicators to be able to provide local realities as much, but to provide an overview of local realities. And the real place for the locally led adaptation indicators to be would be at the NAPs, where this needs to be strongly recommended, reflected. I've also seen some very good work being done by ICAD, which have released some indicators at the locally led adaptation. Very quickly, I would also touch from what Paul has mentioned, very interesting point as well. I think what I would point to is that irrespective of indicators being developed through a technical process, the reporting of the data will always be officially done by the parties. So the data are always official, owned by and reported by the parties, and they will then go in the public domain. What the GGA does is to bring them together to provide a global overview, including perhaps through the global stocktake. The second one, hopefully, will be much richer on adaptation than it was in the first global stocktake. I would also very quickly point to, I'm sure that many of us glanced through the NDC synthesis report released this week. I have seen that almost 2/3 of the parties have now started reflecting time-bound quantified adaptation targets. And overall, there is a 21% increase in parties including quantified adaptation targets compared to the previous NDC, which doesn't come with a surprise. So there seems to be a lot of momentum as well among the countries to start quantifying adaptation and measure it in a much more structured way.
Thanks, Animesh, for this. And Sasha?
Yeah, thanks. Thanks so much for these questions. And I'm glad we're moving into looking at implementation. And to note that, the GGA indicators, it's a list of indicators, and the GGA decision at COP30 is really about what is our vision on how to achieve the global goal on adaptation, enshrined in Article 7.1 of the Paris Agreement, as well as the UAE Global Climate Resilience Framework, and also in assessing its progress. So we have to look at what are the sorts of implementation provisions that we want to be included in this COP30 decision to make these indicators relevant, to incorporate and implementable. So, what are the additional methodological work that will be required for indicators? What is the, capacity building and support needs that Animesh did, describe under the Sendai framework in terms of knowledge sharing, capacity for reporting and so on. Also, what is the data readiness, and what are the provisions for the analysis of the results and trends that the data from the indicators are showing? What is it that we want to see? What is it that we want? And then also looking at the synthesis of information, this issue of qualitative narratives and assessment of progress. All these things we have not started talking about. And I think this is where it's quite important for, CSOs, for local communities, researchers, national governments, and so on, to start really thinking about what are these implementation provisions that we want in the COP30 decision to make the GGA indicators actually able to achieve what the overall goal of or vision for the GGA is. Something to think about, and how can we now incorporate LLA and so on in it, and what can we advocate? What are the advocacy messages we want to push at COP30? A lot of us, negotiators will start their journey next week for COP. So I think this webinar, this session is actually quite critical for us to start thinking about this and start actioning it. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. I'll take one more question from the audience from Richard Eubank, and I'll turn this one to Margot Zeta and Tuna. So the GGA indicators include a number of terms that have no university agreed definition, for example, climate resilient agriculture. And this could undermine a more precise measurement. How can this be addressed before they're finalized? I will caveat this, or maybe as a next step to being adopted at COP. So it'd be great to hear from UNEC's experience. And for you now, I guess it's what does that mean nationally, and how do you see these dynamics take place in the national to local level in Vietnam?
Thanks, Emily. So from my perspective as a statistician, that is a very, very fair point. And indeed, if there is no internationally agreed definition, and then it will undermine the comparability of the collected data. We know that some of the indicators are not yet mature to have that international comparability. They may not even have the metadata yet. However, we also need to start working on them to start generating some practice, so that there can be that international agreement and harmonization, because it rarely happens, in fact, that this harmonization of the definitions happens in a void. It usually, what we can see in the especially in the statistical community, is that we can see some emerging practices, and that through a cooperation, countries then agree on what is the best way to approach such term, to agree on it. So I would definitely recognize that, yeah, that is a challenge, but I'm not sure that this can be addressed before they are finalized. And certainly I would encourage further work on standardizing those terms, so we can really arrive in the long term at internationally comparable data. Thank you.
I would like to emphasize the importance of the manual. So we will have the description of each indicator and the description how to correct the information, how to calculate the information, and how to report each indicator. So the stakeholder will know how to correct and how to report this indicator. From our experience, we have organized very many training, but from time to time, the stakeholder when implementing the M&E system, they still have to question about the definition of the indicator. So I want to emphasize another the aspect of the problem is we agree that with the idea that the indicator will be applied and then will be refined over the time, and this will be the process of learning. And however, it's also necessary to avoid burdening for the countries with the excessive number of indicators. So from Vietnam perspective, we propose that we should adopt a core set of mandatory indicator. For example, around 40 indicators, and with the remaining indicator, they will be voluntary. So if a country can apply all the 100 indicator is perfect, but I think that 50% of indicators will be a great idea.
Wonderful. Thank you so much to the panelists. I know that Nega is still with us. He still has power in his laptop. So Nega, would you like to come in? And I'll also, and afterwards we're gonna close up because the final plenary of D&C Days is coming on now. So Nega, if you have a few views in 1 or 2 minutes, please come in.
Okay, thank you, Emily. I just want to make a very quick points. One on the universal definition of terms. That is obvious. Many of the experts have been pushing for the standard definition of those indicators because these indicators are going to be used by, if they are lucky, by more than 150 plus parties. So we need to make sure that each and every indicator is consistently interpreted across the different parties. Otherwise, we cannot really make aggregation and the comparison possible. So as you said it, we need to have a standard definition for all indicators. But for the definition of terms, of course, we have a debate at the group level during the indicator refinement process. So by default, we were using the IPCC definition of terms during the indicator refinement work. So unless we agree on a different standard, then we will be using the IPCC definition for understanding the different technical terms. And also on the locally led adaptation, really we were constrained to maintain the balance between universal the global nature of indicators and at the same time representing the local conditions. So the main problem is that we have been limited to 100 for the indicator list. So that means when you divide it by 11 thematic and dimensional targets, that's roughly 9 indicators. So for a given sectors, anyone can understand that 9 indicators cannot comprehensively cover progress in terms of progress towards adaptation in that particular sector. So the fact that that we call it a magic number, that magic number 100 limited the number of indicators, clearly put a lot of pressure on us. So we understand the indicator list might not be comprehensive, but at least gives you some broader picture in terms of the progress we made in terms of addressing climate change risks. Thank you, and back to you, Emily.
Wonderful. Thank you so much again. Thank you so much. Warm round of applause to our panel. Thank you so much for all your insights today. And I feel we had a great, a lot of perspective from different scales. And to me, I'm definitely going to COP with a better understanding of what are the things that should be there and that could be there as part of a COP30 decision. So thank you so much. On this note, I'll just flag that the final plenary session of Development and Climate Days is going on right now. So feel free to log in using your same code and join the plenary. Thank you very much to everyone and have a lovely day.